Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have the latest from the live radar, run for the latest UKV, have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days. It does continue to be fairly unsettled and cool for the rest of this working week, but as we head into the weekend and the start of the following week, it is going to be turning both warmer and drier as we do start to see high pressure building in off the near continent. It does look like temperatures on Sunday and Monday could get into the low 20s, maybe 21, 22, or even an isolated 23. And as we'll see from the longer range charts, as we progress further into next week, there is even the possibility of seeing mid to high 20s. Now, I do think the runs we've seen over the past few days from the GM, which show temperatures up towards 30 degrees, are going to be a bit too optimistic. I think more realistic is probably around the 25 degree range. But nonetheless, for late April into early May, that is very, very warm, and you could, in theory, categorize it as a bit of a spring heat wave. Now, just how warm it gets, there is still some uncertainty, but definitely we are looking like we're going to see into those low 20s. However, it isn't going to be a stable, warm and dry spell. It is going to be fairly unstable, i.e. there will likely be some showers and some storms around, especially later on next week. And we don't think it's going to last too long, and that is because this high pressure is always moving and looks likely to see lower pressure, at least some capacity, to return as we do head into early May. So yes, warm and dry, potentially even hot, but it could come with quite an unsettled breakdown in the following days. So do remember, if you enjoy my video, make sure you like and subscribe. And remember to follow me on Twitter as well, the link's in the description. And we all woke up to this morning to some heavy rain, especially across eastern parts, but it did clear during the day, and we've been left with a pleasant evening. Quite a lot of sunshine around, bits and bobs of cloud, and a bit of drizzle here or there. But generally speaking, it's been a pleasant second half to the day. Now, recording this around 9 PM in the evening, and you can see temperatures are not particularly great this evening, definitely coolest in the east. We've still got a bit of lingering cloud, but generally speaking, they're around average for the time of year, slowly increasing over the coming days. Now, do head over to the latest UKV. Before any warm conditions arrive this weekend, we are going to see some up and down conditions, especially in terms of rain. As we progress through into Thursday, still very pleasant across many parts in the central, eastern and northern areas, but rain starting to come in off the Atlantic. And you see for much Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, it is going to be a very unsettled Thursday afternoon, overnight into Friday. Now, that rain tries to progress eastwards, but does struggle to cross the Irish Sea through Friday. But we do see bits and bobs of rain progress eastwards into Saturday. But with that high pressure building in across the east in from Europe, we are going to see that precipitation slow down a lot and really disintegrate away through the weekend, just leaving a bit of cloud through Saturday, and eventually into Sunday. Rain again tries to push in off the Atlantic, but really struggles, and eventually through Sunday into Monday, that high pressure starts to build in, and you can see that from the lack of precipitation and the wind starting to veer in from the south or southeast. And you can see this with this high pressure signal, with it building in from the near continent, and it would start to turn much warmer. Now, at this stage, we are starting to see above average upper air temperatures, but nothing too remarkable yet. We do think it could just about get into the double digits, so temperatures could be a few degrees higher than what we're seeing on Monday. Now, to look at the max temperatures as we head into Thursday, a pretty average day around the 14 to 17 degree mark. Nothing exceptional, but nothing bad either. As we progress into Friday, temperatures once again in and around average, sort of mid-teens, around the 13 to 17 degree range. Into Saturday, temperatures are improving ever so slightly, more around the mid to high teens, more 17, 18 degrees there, more yellow on the chart. And into Sunday, quite a big jump as we do start to see temperatures getting towards the 20 degree range, 18 to 20 degrees there for Sunday. Could even be an isolated 21 or maybe 22. And finally into Monday, even warmer, looking at widely 20 to 22 across England and Wales. As said, 23, 24 degrees is a possibility, and I do expect it to get even warmer through Tuesday and Wednesday. So you can start to see the warm and hopefully dry conditions start to emerge. But as I said, I'm expecting later on in the week for it to turn a little bit more unsettled. Potentially some thunderstorms could be on the cards. Now, if you do head over to the latest GFS, you can see low pressure continues to try and push in off the Atlantic, but high pressure will build in off the near continent. We do see a southerly or southeasterly wind for a time, but we need to keep eyes on this low pressure system out to our southwest. Now, initially, the GFS is not really flirting with that. But not all runs are showing that. Other runs are showing this low much, much closer, which would allow for some significant thunderstorms and heavy showers to develop. Most of the precipitation here is across the Bay of Biscay, maybe just into the Channel Islands and across parts of Iberia. So not too bad there for the UK, but if this low was slightly closer, a few hundred miles closer, then we have got the risk of those storms. You see the Cape is fairly moderate across that area of low pressure, so if it did push in, then yeah, we could be in for quite a thundery spell. But luckily, this GFS not really flirting with it too much. Sea upper air temperatures up towards the double digits, just about flirting with a 10-degree isotherm there as we do head into the longer range, but not quite as warm as the GM or some of the other runs today, but still very warm and pleasant. And if we do just, for example, go to one of these afternoons, temperatures, as I said, widely in the low 20s. But you can see near continent going up towards the mid-20s, and it just shows we are very close to something even warmer, but it just depends on exactly the orientation of that high. However, this GFS run does a complete reversal. That high transitions from Europe out towards Iceland and Greenland. And look at this, we unlock the doors to a very cold Arctic air mass as we do head into early May. Look at this, the minus 10-degree isotherm starts to push in. And yeah, looks exceptionally cold. Temperature deviation around the 8 to 10 degrees below average. And the potential equivalent temperature, look at that ridiculously cold air coming directly from the North Pole. Again, this is one run. I wouldn't put too much weight into it as well. This is right at the extended range. But it just shows you how quickly conditions can change if that high is slightly differently positioned. If it's to our east, it's pulling up a southerly wind. If it's to our west, pulling in a northerly wind. And that's the transition we see here from the GFS, from very warm southerlies to very cold northerlies. And that is definitely a possibility into early May. But as I said, I wouldn't put too much weight into it at this stage, just because we're not seeing any support from any other runs. And it is right in the extended range. Now, if you look at the GM now, which has been the most consistent run with this warm spell next week, it's probably shown it for the longest time as well, so very good performance from the GM, but it probably did be a little bit optimistic, a bit over the top with its severity, as I said, showing 30 degrees through the weekend. Now, if we do look again, we do see this southeasterly wind, but again, these lows are slightly closer. You can see if we look at the precipitation, some of these storms are right on our shores and potentially could impact western areas there towards day 10. Major storms still across France, the Bay of Biscay, but we do start to see some of those storms pushing into western areas. That's one to keep a close eye on. But it is all due to this southerly wind. Very warm air mass pushes in for a time. The 10-degree isotherm pushes in for all, and we would expect, at least early on in the week, to see temperatures by the middle of the afternoon to be well into the mid-20s, so about 24 to 26 degrees. Initially very pleasant and dry, but the Cape starts to pick up later on in the week. We'd expect to start to see some storms. Look at that, some pretty high Cape levels there by day 10. And as a result, we would expect to start to see some heavy showers and some storms drifting up from the south. You can see these streaks from the south. That is a pretty typical storm track, and that's something to keep a very close eye on. So GM, very warm, not quite as hot as its recent runs, but still into the mid-20s, but definitely showing the risk of some major storms there out towards early May. Now finally, if we compare it to the latest ECMWF, broadly very similar. high pressure building in across Europe. Again, that low flirting with our southwest, but like the GFS, it's not particularly close by, and similar to the GFS, it transitioned westwards as well and tries to unlock the doors again to some cold northerly airflows. ECMWF from GFS, very, very similar today. Now on board with a warmer spell next week, but then do slowly transition to something much, much colder for early May. If we do run it back a few frames, very similar to the GEM, we do see the 10-degree isotherm coming in, but a very similar orientation to the GFS. So very pleasant for at least a few days here from the ECMWF. Not lasting too long, but 2 or 3 days there, and then next week would be into the mid-20s before it does start to cool down. Now, to finish by looking at the latest ensembles, so we just quickly refresh this. You can see the upwards trend over the next 5 days or so, from slightly below average to slightly above, and then significantly above there for late April and early May. You can see some of the runs peaking around that 10 to 12 degree isotherm. Not massive signal, which does mean that that mid-20 scenario is definitely a possibility, just not a guarantee, for it does slowly start to drop off into early May. But those runs that were showing very cold northeasterlies pushing in, yeah, not got too much support from that. Of course, we are looking at London here, so the GFS isn't going very cold yet, and that's because it is, of course, cold in the north and still mild in the south by the end of the run. But definitely a downwards trend, just nothing too consistent. Precipitation is fairly low because there are quite a few spikes, some small spikes indicating quite a lot of convection. So again, we'll have to wait and see how that does develop. But definitely strong signal for something warm there into next week, and hopefully dry as well, all dependent on the positioning of that little cut-off low to our southwest. Temperatures quite widely from the ensembles in towards that 20-degree mark, and some even up towards 25 degrees. And if you finish by looking at the latest ECMWF, again looking at the midnight run, big spike in temperatures into next week, even more optimism there for the upper air temperatures to get towards the 10-degree mark, and exceed precipitation, again very similar, low, in terms of spikes, but definitely pretty moderate frequency, which does mean there is a high chance of some convection in places. Again, we'll have to wait and see the severity of that for a slow drop off there into early May. So definitely looks like we're going to end April and start May on a warm note. Just how warm will it be is still yet to be determined, but I think anything around the 20 to 25 degree range is a very real possibility. As we saw from the UKV, definitely looking at 22, 23, but I think 25, 26, 27 is definitely on the cards, and yeah, would be setting up a little bit of a mini spring heat wave here for everyone to enjoy. So anyway, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.